Hello and welcome to Real Chat with Kat, the podcast dedicated to igniting your entrepreneurial spirit and empowering you to conquer new horizons. In this podcast, we chat with inspiring entrepreneurs on their journey to success through some amazingly insightful and expansive conversations. These episodes thrive on thought-provoking chats where our guests fearlessly explore their path to success, sharing their experiences, failures, and triumphs. No topic is off limits as we deep dive into the talked about and not so talked about pieces it takes to build a business, overcome limiting beliefs, deal with personal struggles, and everything in between that shapes our lives and our businesses. I'm your host, Kat Polsinelli, creator and founder at The Lotus Effect, where we believe that success is not just about strategies and tactics, it's about cultivating a powerful mindset and creating customized business operations that align with you and your true purpose. Whether it's mastering time management, improving productivity, enhancing leadership skills, or simply fostering a growth-oriented mindset, we'll provide you with the tools and strategies to flourish in both your business and personal life. I'm so excited to have you join us today in this episode, so get ready to feel empowered and inspired as we learn together and from one another on how to rise above challenges, break through limitations, and unlock our full potential. Let's dive in. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Real Chat with Kat. I'm so excited to have you guys here with me today and my amazing guests. So, hello, Nicole. Thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today. Do us all a favor. Tell us who you are, what it is that you do, and what got you into this space.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kat, for having me on. My name is Nicole Connor. I am a quantum initiator and activator and founder of the Grand Rising Experience, which is my little baby that I birthed into reality. And it's a space where I like to inspire others to transform their pain into power so that they can claim and embody the truth of who they are. Because I believe that we all have incredibly hard seasons that we go through in our lives. And there's always nuggets of wisdom that are embedded inside of it. And it's how we choose to move forward from those spaces that can determine the future trajectory of how we create the outcomes in our lives. And having gone through significant burnout, healing myself holistically, and a bunch of other trials and tribulations, which I know you can relate to as well. It's always finding that will inside of ourselves to really dig in and find the true potential that lives inside of us.
Yeah, definitely. Now, tell me how on earth you got into this quantum field and the creation of all the things, the Grand Rising and everything. Like, where did that come from?
That's a great question. It started for me in 2017. I was working corporate, a very traditional job inside of the legal and financial realms, and working 80 to 100 hours a week. And I burnt out. I just burned to the ground. And at that time, I thought it was everyone else's fault that I was burnt out because I was being overworked and no one was listening to me and all of my boundaries were being violated. And then I had to come to the really hard realization through that process of burnout that I was the only common denominator of my life. And perhaps if I didn't change, nothing else would. And I ended up taking this 4 or 5 month sabbatical from life. So I quit my job, left in a bit of a firestorm, which I don't recommend. Don't recommend that. And I ended up taking this 4 to 5 month sabbatical from life. And I holed up in my condo. I was living in Montreal at the time. And I really focused on myself. And I had deep resistance into going into the allopathic medical system at that time because I grew up in a home with mental illness and watching people that I love dearly be traumatized inside of the mental health care system through over medication and not enough support and therapy. That was something for me that I truly wanted to avoid if I could. So I was very curious at that time and highly motivated to see if there were ways that I could naturally get a hold of these panic attacks that I was having, find ways to be able to sleep at night without the assistance of something else. If I could start moving my body in ways that alleviated like the screaming that seemed to be happening inside that I couldn't let out, that I had no other outlet for through physical movement and exercise. So it just started becoming this really interesting process of me building my own little personal toolkit of finding things that just through making micro adjustments in movement and nutrition, learning how to meditate, starting to dig deeper into maybe some more philosophical concepts about depression and anxiety, to try and really see if I could get control of that myself and slowly start taking charge of it. And that slowly evolved over the past few years where I've gone back into corporate twice since then. Didn't really work. But it kind of sparked this awakening in me. And but it is through my time in corporate and finance and legal that I really started kind of understanding contracts and jurisdiction and capacity, which ultimately is who am I? Who is everyone else? Where are we all standing? And what agreements bind us all? What contracts and agreements bind us all, which is a really
Mm.
interesting philosophy for life because regardless of where we sit, in any facet of our life, something like that exists, whether it's between us and an employer, us and a spouse, us and a friend, parents, siblings, children. Um, those three things always seem to show up and govern how we end up in relationship with people. So it's turned into this really beautiful inside out journey of reclaiming like the truth of who you are and being able to learn how to stand in the world differently, not without its challenges, not without its trials and tribulations, not without, significant mistakes and learning, specifically in the context of relationship. But yeah, that's kind of how I fell into this work, and it's extended for me into the what I like to call the civil world. So through having this deeper understanding of who I am, where I'm standing, and the agreements that I'm inside of, I'm now able to look at contracts that people might have with like a utility company or their employment contracts or contracts that they have with their landlords, any other contract that could potentially start creating some issues in your life and allow people to, through an inside out perspective, kind of show up and claim their own ownership within those contracts as well to be able to negotiate equitable outcomes from a space that feels safe and non-adversarial and empowering so that we don't feel controlled by these contracts outside of us because we're now getting better control of what's happening inside.
Mm. Oh, that's so amazing. Like just the wording itself of the whole thing. But I want to go back to two things that you mentioned. And one of them is talking about you being the common denominator, which is something you said in the beginning. And this is something that I find extremely empowering that I think a lot of people have not yet discovered. Like, people take ownership of certain things, but I don't think that people understand that when you can take ownership and realize that you are the common denominator across the board, how much control that actually gives you back to be able to decide what you want in your life, what you don't want in your life, and what you want to or not want to change. Because so many of us get stuck in this, I don't know how to change it, right? Kind of perception. And it's like, no, you do. You just don't want to, because that means you have to take ownership of whatever it is that you need to fix, correct, get rid of in your life.
It's an incredibly confronting experience. Like when you have to sit down and really do an audit of your life, it's almost like sitting down and doing a budget for the first time when you're looking at your finances, because you have to kind of
Yeah.
look at where you're in the red and the black in your life. Where are you harming or helping yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And it's messy. It can be really messy. And it's also very difficult because everyone has a story, everyone has a history. We're constantly bringing our past into our present, both
Mm-hmm.
consciously and unconsciously. And some people have had incredibly traumatic histories. So it becomes this really kind of complex and nuanced space to start entering into, when we have to start taking accountability and responsibility. So it's not always that we're taking accountability and responsibility because some really bad things have happened to us in our past. The responsibility and accountability that we're taking is always in the present moment. So, okay, now I'm sitting here in this present moment. What can I now take responsibility and accountability over to help make the next moment a little bit better and start making
Mm-hmm.
those micro adjustments? And I kind of work inside of this pyramid that I call my HALT pyramid. So you have to halt before you can rise. And HALT stands for honesty, acceptance, loyalty, and trust, because self trust for me is at the pinnacle of being able to really take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you're building the type of self-trust that allows you to take right action in the right moment. But we can only build that trust when we can have like this really radical honesty with ourselves and be able to accept, take responsibility for where we're at in our life. Yeah, get to the point that we're accepting it and going like, I can't change the past. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
change the past. I can take what I'm being given right now and figure out what to do with it, but I have to work from this present moment and be aware of what parts of the past are coming forward and then start showing up for ourselves in meaningful ways. So when I was talking earlier about I had to move my body and I had to fuel myself correctly and I had to find those moments of meditation, how could I continue to show up for myself every single day and build that loyalty within myself that allowed me to trust myself? Because we can't trust other people if we can't trust ourselves. So it becomes this really interesting loop that we end up in. And that's been an incredibly powerful paradigm, I would say, that's come out of this journey that started with, well, it all starts and ends with me. So what am I going to do about it?
Yeah, and like you said, it's taking the story, right, and your past, and not essentially what you hear a lot of people say, not allowing it to define who you are in your current moment, right? Because you can use your story to completely debilitate you, or you can use your story as a way to empower yourself because now you realize, okay, well, I didn't like that, or this didn't work. So now I need to pivot, I need to shift, I need to do X, Y, Z. But at the same time, having ownership of that story can be very difficult for people. Like you said, people with very traumatic past, right? It's very hard to put it on you, but not in a guilt way. And that's why I think where a lot of people get confused, right? And I went through it as well. I know you and I talked about this prior, that I was in an 8-year abusive relationship. And so being a mom with 2 boys that went through that, it was very hard for me to let go of the guilt and the shame around that because I couldn't bring my kids up in a perfect home, which none of us actually have, right? We're all doing the best that we can. But owning your story is very different than sitting in the guilt of that story. And I think that's where the difference lies that people have to understand. Taking ownership is saying, okay, yeah, I screwed up. This shit didn't work. And that's okay because now I can do different moving forward versus sitting in it of this sucks. I wish I wouldn't have done that. If I could have done this, if I could have changed that, which is, like you said, it creates that loop and it's not going to actually cause any change. It's just going to continue to bring you down. And, the other piece that you talked about, is the micro changes. And I love my micro changes. So we have to have this conversation around this too, because again, right, so many people are hearing other people say, well, you just need to make a change. And instead of us hearing, okay, what can I do now that could slightly change what I am doing? All we hear is, okay, something sucks, something's broken, something doesn't work. What do I need to drop completely right now and reroute to get to where I need to be? And that's where so many people get to that. It's almost like this, yeah, I've got it. And then you get to the top of the hill and you're like, I don't have it anymore. And you go right backwards, right? And that happens so many times in people's lives as well, because instead of making those micro changes, those micro shifts, we're trying to change our entire world in one day. And we wonder why shit hits the fan and it falls apart. And then we come back down to the bottom going, well, that sucked. Apparently I'm not good at this. And that's not the actual truth.
No, and that hits at the loyalty aspect that I've kind of built into this pyramid, because the opposite of loyalty is self-betrayal. And when we continually fail to show up for ourselves, we end up in these shame spirals and these loops that reinforce the reason why we believe we can't do it in the first place. And that's why, as you said, the micro adjustments are so important, because it shows us that we can and that we're capable. And it's also that we tend to put these timelines on ourselves that are completely unrealistic. And it's because we live in this hyper connected, highlight reel world where even now, if you're building content, it's like 10 seconds or less, because no one seems to have an attention span. And what we've failed to forget is that we're here. Like, we're here for quite a few years. Like, if you're lucky, God willing, you're here for close to 100 years. So what's a year? What's 2 years? What's 3 years in the greater scheme of things? However, survival usually has us looking in the immediate future too, to make sure that we're making these adjustments, which can feel very knee jerky at the time and actually create this snowball effect, of unwanted issues in the process. And that's something that I've always struggled with, because chaos and crash is what I knew. And a lot of it was sitting in my nervous system, and it was a trauma response. So I was dealing with underlying shame and feelings of not enoughness and abandonment issues and all of these things that just compile and compile and compile, that it just creates how we now perceive the world and receive what's happening to us and then project back into it. And it's something I've learned. I've done a little bit of studying on it, but it seems to be something that's been more organically showing up for me, is like observing and not absorbing what's happening around me. So can I sit here? Can I detach, not dissociate, but detach from something that's happening and try and hold my center as much as possible? Notice when my emotions are swinging, pendulum style, from one side to the other, instead of just ebbing and flowing in the middle, and really observe what's happening around me, and so that I can respond to it and not react to it, because those are two very different states that we end up in, whether it's in conflict, and it can happen in joy too. We can be in ecstatic states and incredibly happy and make really bad decisions because of how happy we are, right? So it's how charged are we? Because ultimately, the more you can find your center, sit in the center of your own storm, find those places of neutrality that allow you to determine how you're going to charge a situation. Everything's neutral. We add the positive or the negative to it. So, like, where am I sitting? Jurisdiction. Where am I standing? Who am I in this moment? What agreements are being formed based on this reaction that I make? And it's a very powerful place to be. It's an incredibly hard place to find. Not saying I've figured it out, but I'm learning how to feel my way into those spaces. And I notice the world radically show up differently for me, when I can do that.
Yeah. And I love that you said, detach, not just disassociate, right? Because there's a very big difference. And we don't realize that, right? We think, oh, well, I don't want any part of that. Okay, well, that's not you solving the problem. It's still you making a choice, but it's not you solving the problem. What you're doing is hoping that if you push it out of your mind or push away from it enough, that it'll just go away, and not realizing what there is in that interim that may have been trying to teach you something, tell you something, make you aware of, that's within yourself that you need to work on, right? Certain things that are brought up for reasons. And, especially for those that have trauma, for instance, right? We don't necessarily deal with the healing part of it until the body feels safe. And then you will notice that certain things kind of start popping up again. You're like, what the hell? But if you can learn to detach from it, it's kind of like I tell people it's like standing outside of your body and like looking at the entire scene, but you get to see the perspective from both sides instead of just yours. And it's really interesting because it's like you're looking at a story and you're trying to figure the story out. And when you can get to that place of being able to see yourself as a story and be like, oh, okay, well, this is what it's trying to teach. This is what it's doing. This is what they were supposed to learn, right? It's a totally different perspective. I mean, think of how many times you watch a movie, whether it's a love story, an action film, there's always some lesson, right? And there's things that you find out and you're like, no, go this direction. They want that, right? Like we do that on a regular basis. Think of the power behind you being able to detach yourself to see the entire story around you and being able to figure out the clues from that perspective, except for it's in your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said something earlier too to that point that was really interesting. It's like sometimes we just don't have the awareness that we can change, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the moment you have the awareness that like, oh, I can actually change this. I have control over what's happening. Then change becomes this interesting negotiation you enter into with yourself because it's like, well, now that you know, you either do it or you don't. And
Yep.
it's literally that simple, but that complicated. And that challenging because it's like you either didn't know you could, so you didn't, or you now know you can and you don't want to for whatever
Yep.
reason. And sometimes our pain is an incredibly comfortable place to be because it's familiar and it's what we know and it's how
Mm-hmm.
we've been conditioned to live. When you live in survival for so long, it's comfortable. And the body, I love that you brought up the body as well, because body mapping was a huge part of my journey early on, was asking myself this question, where do I feel it in my body? I was so
Mm.
dissociated. I always said I was like dead on arrival from the neck up. Like I couldn't, I literally had such a high threshold for physical pain that things could like be physically inflicting me and I couldn't feel it. And I had doctors that were shocked at the level of pain I was able to endure.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and I had this issue with my back, my lower back, and it was through digging into this idea of body mapping and that emotions can be stored in the body and that certain areas of the body are attached to certain emotions. And then if you want to go a little more esoteric, you can get into the chakra system, and start looking into that, or you can look at bioenergetics. But there is this really interesting mapping procedure that you can go through with your body so that even if like logically you can't start to make heads or tails of why you're feeling the way you are,
Mm-hmm.
can you scan through your body? It's like, where am I holding tension? Is it in my, do I have a headache? Am I clenching my jaw? Am I having trouble swallowing? Am I feeling tension in my shoulders, my neck, my back? When I breathe in or breathe out, am I holding it either on the inhale or the exhale? Do I have a back issue, a nagging knee issue? So many telltale signs that get locked and stored in the body that we are not taught to be the roadmap back to our being. And it
Yeah.
can be a great place to start because we're usually very aware of the physical issues that we have, but rarely are the connection ever made to the emotional and mental aspects of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the deep rooted connection. And we don't realize that, right, of where that's coming from. I can give you guys a perfect example of that. You know, when I came out of my abusive relationship, I shoved everything in a box. I took care of my kids. I went to work. I put myself through school. I became busy, for lack of better terms, just so I didn't have to be with myself. Right. But after 1 year of being out of that situation and constantly being hit with the trauma of court and all the things and everything in between, I started having heart issues. Right at the age of 28, 29. And everybody was like, what the hell is going on? Right. And well, I went through all the tests, right? I had the EKG done. I had to wear the heart monitor for 24 hours. Like all these things were done. And the guy was like, I mean, your heart's healthy. He's like, you got an extra 1,000 heartbeats in a 24-hour period, but like you're good. So maybe it's just stress. And I was like, I'm not
Not
stressed.
stressed.
I'm not in my relationship anymore. Why would I be stressed? But you don't think about that, right? And it's so quick for us to be like, I'll just go to a doctor because a doctor will tell me what's wrong. You're looking for that external validation for somebody else to give you an answer versus taking the time to see if you can get the answer yourself. And I'm not saying, right, that doctors aren't helpful and that they aren't needed. Like, they do amazing work and they are miracle workers, and they are taught by a book of how to deal with people. But what they are not taught is how to ask the right questions to figure out what underlying causes may be at the root of what someone's issue is, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I like that you brought that up, because when we wade into the world of alternative medicine, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not certified in anything. I'm only speaking strictly from my own personal experience, where I've both been a victim of and witnessed others of the traditional systems that fail to look at the human as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been inside of the more holistic systems, which I'm like, this is really interesting, but I can't come see you if I break a bone or have a gash that needs to be
Right.
stitched, right? So we do have to find the way that we can kind of bridge that level of understanding and not do those extremes of the pendulum, and be able
Mm-hmm.
to find value in both sides. And I'm also very aware, kind of in my world, that you tend to attract who you are, not what you desire sometimes. And the people
Mm.
that tend to show up in our lives are reflections of where we are at. So if I'm going to see like a medical professional, I'm looking at them going like, do they look like they're sleeping? Do they look like they're eating well? Do they look like they are, from a physiological standpoint, caring for themselves the way I care for myself, or would seek advice from someone who is displaying like that kind of optimal health? And
Mm-hmm.
when we kind of fail to recognize that in others and then get frustrated when they can't meet our needs, it's like, well, there's a little bit of dissonance there. And they can only meet you as deeply as they meet themselves. You can only meet yourself as deeply, or you can only meet others as deeply as you meet yourself. So
Yeah.
that's where that accountability and responsibility comes in. And we really have to learn how to get honest with ourselves, so that we can start taking accountability for the choices that we make every day.
Yeah, 100%. I love that you brought in the integration, right, of both of them, and understanding that like everybody has a place, your doctors have a place and everything. It's just, it means that you, and right, I talk about this in a lot of my podcast episodes, you don't always need an external validation to give you an answer to something that I guarantee if you sat with it long enough, you could get answers yourself, right? But that means that you have to be able to be present. And we, as a high functioning society, don't necessarily know what that means anymore, right? We're just always on the go. We're always on the next thing, the next topic, the next whatever. And so it's really coming back to being present with yourself so that you can be aware of what is going on before it gets to, right, the deeper end where you do need severe medical attention or something of the sort. But I have to go back to, we were talking about the micro changes. I would love to know if you have any tips that work best for you on some micro changes that you did, because it's so funny that you brought that up. I literally just saw this short little snippet of a gentleman that, he's a huge bodybuilder, and he was talking to this gentleman, and they were asking him about like, how do you get into the gym? And he said, what's funny, he said, is you have all these trainers and all these people that are like, oh, you get in here and you work out for hours and you sweat it off and blah, blah, blah. He's like, and what they're doing, he said, is a lot of people they're feeding their own ego because they know you can't get to where they're at. He said, what I suggest is for the first 2 weeks, he was like, you just go to the gym. He's like, I don't even want you to do anything. He said, just walk around it, go check the things out, touch the weights, right? Just be there and then leave. He's like, because what you're doing is you're just creating that habit of just showing up. He's like, and then pick up some weights, try out a machine, see how you feel. He's like, and then you can build from there. And I thought that was like the most incredible way to think about not only trying out the gym, in a totally different light, because I love exercising and working out, stuff like that, but in a way that, right, those micro changes we were talking about that you can do, where you can start super simple, like walking through the doors of the gym and not actually doing anything. You can do the same thing in your life with certain things that are going to continue to build. And what you're doing is you're building that small habit, you're compounding on top of each other to then create the habit you actually want, without going for that first and shutting your system down, and then it bounces back and says, yeah, no, we're done.
Yeah. And what I like about that example too is when you take the time to do something slowly and you allow yourself to be present, you then get to observe the thoughts that are bubbling up in those moments. So when you're walking through that front door of the gym, you're going to be met with every resistant thought that has kept you out of there prior. And if you can get present enough, you're going to be able to start noticing those thoughts and what's coming up, how it's maybe appearing in your body. Like, is it showing up in your chest? Are you getting sweaty? Are you clenching your jaw? And you can get really curious about maybe where that's coming from. So I love that example that you just gave, because it does lend itself to like my favorite thing, which is curiosity, and being able just to ask yourself why and then allow yourself to follow the why.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, okay, it's going to sound really crazy. One of the micro adjustments that I made was every night I would put a glass next to my coffee maker to remind myself to have a glass of water before I drank my coffee, because
Okay.
I am like that person who's like perpetually dehydrated. So then I wouldn't drink any water. And then I'm like, I need to drink like my 2 liters a day. And then I'm like guzzling water, and then you're peeing all the time. And
Oh my
it's
gosh.
disruptive to your day, right? It's so disruptive. But when you build on that slowly, instead of going from like zero to nothing, you're able to now build up to that tolerance to take in the water, that it's not detoxing your system. Because the other problem that happens when you drink that much water that fast is you also go into detox mode, and then come the headaches, and then the resistance builds and you stop doing it. So it was
Mm,
like, can I drink a glass of water before I have my coffee? So I started doing that. With the example with the gym, I hated going to the gym. And my boyfriend at the time was like, Nicole, when I was going through burnout, he was like, you really like just go to the gym and lift some weights. You're gonna feel so much better. I'm like, I don't too. But I did. We had a beautiful gym in our building, and I ended up going down, and he gave me a really easy system and like protocol to follow, and just said, do what you can do. It wasn't like max out your reps or
mm-hmm.
um be as sore as possible so that you don't want to go in the next day. Like you said, just do a little bit.
Yeah.
And it wasn't go to the gym and change my diet and change my sleep patterns and all at the same time. What I found is that the more I went to the gym, the more I started enjoying going to the gym. And then I actually started to push myself a little bit harder. And then my nutrition naturally started to fall in line, because I was more conscious of how I was fueling my body. And I was consciously choosing foods that would sustain me and help me reach the goals that I was starting to create, instead of trying to work backwards with like this idealized version of who I thought I could become in the gym,
Yeah.
which I would never know because I'd never really been there before. I didn't know what my body shape and type could and could not do.
Mm-hmm.
So it was trying to make those like tiny little adjustments that that would allow me to not betray and not show up at the gym. And getting my clothes ready in the morning or the night before so that I could do that. Not hitting snooze.
Yeah.
Not hitting snooze was a big one on my alarm. But it was also something I did during the pandemic, which was super helpful, I think. And I shared it with my team at the time. I walked to work every morning. Even though I didn't have an office to go into, I would still get up and I would walk around the block before I went to work every morning
Oh, wow.
to try and
Okay.
keep my schedule, right? To ensure that I was still getting out and going through the process of getting up and starting my day, and almost like
Mm-hmm.
compartmentalizing, if you will, because everyone was working from home. And I'm sure a lot of people now are still working from home. There's been these interesting transitions that have happened, because that slog of just going from bed to desk um,
Yeah.
really mess with you mentally. And then it doesn't give you that distance between home and office. And it can also put you into burnout. because you don't have that separation. Those boundaries get very blurred. But I would
Mm-hmm.
walk to work and I would walk home from work. And I did that every day during the pandemic. So that was really interesting.
Oh, I love that one so much because I started doing that with my husband when he started working from home full time. And, he still travels in between. But I told him, like, I want to get up and, like, I need to do something, right? Like, I already did my yogas. I already did my yoga and my stretches and things like that. But he was now working from home full time and he sits in front of the computer a lot. Whereas I have a desk that sits and stands and I'm constantly like I literally will go downstairs just to go pee, just
Yeah.
for the movement of going down the stairs and coming up the stairs, right? There's literally a bathroom down my hall. But that was the whole point of it. So we started doing that in the mornings when he would get up, as we would take a walk around the block just to get movement and then come in and start the day, right? Because you're right, you get so blurred in where you're at and what you're doing. And I mean, sometimes I go to the coffee shop and take my laptop to do work there just to kind of get out and get in different scenery. If it's pretty out, like it was the other day, I was outside half my day on my back porch with my laptop. I did 3 networking calls sitting outside in the yard. But just, you're right. It's just clearing that space in your head and kind of giving you a different light, giving you a different perspective, and keeping that line there where you can say, okay, this is what I need to do, but this is home when I need it. Because you're right, it is hard. And I know there's a lot of people that are still working from home, and a lot of entrepreneurs do the same
Yeah.
thing. And I can say for myself, when I didn't necessarily have like a really big routine in the morning, except for like throw clothes on, take the kid to school, come back home, get started. And I wasn't really like putting clothes on. It was just like, comfy pants, throw a t-shirt on, kind of a thing. It is amazing the difference that it makes in your brain and how your brain sets up your day, of like, oh, it's lazy day, compared to when you get up, get dressed, put something decent on, and then come up and start. It is totally, totally different.
Absolutely. And I will not look at an electronic before I get out of bed. So like something like
Yes.
a bad habit is rolling over and like looking at your phone, especially when your phone is your alarm clock.
Yeah.
But it's like it's a no-go zone. And the same thing at night, like all the electronics go off. I'm an early bird. If I'm not in bed by 10 o'clock, I'm cranky. Like I like being in bed early. But I also like having a wind down time. So for me, it's ideal for me to be in bed at 9 o'clock and then fall asleep by 10. And then I'm usually up around 6. I like my solid 8 hours. Like that was also like a micro adjustment, was making sure that I was getting all of my sleep. So
Mm-hmm.
making like, and it was incrementally walking back my bedtime, not just all of a sudden I'm going to go to bed like 2 hours earlier. It's like
Yeah.
15 minutes at a time, just kind of walking it back. Because I value my sleep. I put a high value on that. And yeah, it's like I like to have the lights off. It's kind of like a nice meditation time, and that's my routine. It's like I try and keep those lights away, and it really helps me protect my peace throughout the day. And even now, like going back to the walking, like I work from home and I still do the same thing. I have a dog, it helps. But she's also like a great resource to tap into to create those boundaries, to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that I can separate work from home and those times of day.
Yeah, definitely. Mine does the same thing. Even when he goes outside, especially if he wants to sun, I get yelled at for not sitting with him. So I'm like, okay, 5 minutes. So I have to go and sit with him.
Yeah.
So it's like a constant throughout my day, but it's great because you're right. It does make you break up those pieces to your day, and it gives you space to breathe and not be in such a hurry, right? Do this, do this, do this, do this. I need to go upstairs to do that. No, it like nothing's going to die. It's not going to catch
Mhm.
on fire. Your computer's not going to freak out if you take 5 minutes to just sit with yourself.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because part of my burnout was I was treating a job like it was life or death. That wasn't life or death. Now, certain aspects of my psyche saw it as life or death when it came to like a
Mm-hmm.
fear of failure or like this imposter syndrome that I had, or my ability to kind of really achieve um, high achievement in my life. So not meeting that felt like sudden death.
Yeah.
So therefore I was treating my job as a life or death thing, but we weren't saving lives. Like it was not absolutely not necessary for me to do that. And that's where that like observation and self-reflection can be so life-changing, such a game
Mm-hmm.
changer, when it comes to getting really, really honest about how we spend our day, what we spend it doing, who we spend it with, and
Mm-hmm.
how it makes us feel. And then riding the shame and the guilt when we have to come to the honest conclusion that this doesn't make me feel so good. Now, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love this so much. Gosh, I think we could talk on this for hours. But I can't thank you enough, Nicole. This is such a beautiful conversation. And it just brings so many things to light that, I've talked to so many people that are dealing with, that are going through, and there's so many people that are trying to find themselves, and people are starting to look for different ways of doing things instead of the traditional go hard or go home crap. So I appreciate these kinds of conversations. One thing before we go and wrap up is I always ask my guests one question, and that is, do you happen to have a quote or a piece of advice you would like to leave the audience with?
I would say if you can embody the idea that you are the creator of your reality, if you can really sit with that and embody the amount of responsibility and accountability that really comes with something like that. And this is not me attempting to, sometimes people think that it can be trying to put like an interference maybe between us and God, not trying to play God, trying to take
Mm-hmm.
full accountability and responsibility over how we are showing up and creating the reality that we live in. So for me, like, you are the creator of your reality. It's the most confronting and empowering statement that you can truly sit with and attempt to integrate and embody little by little through your micro adjustments into your life.
Oh, I love that so much. Yes. Everybody, I hope you wrote that down. So before we go, Nicole, please tell us, how can everybody find you? Where can they connect with you? How can they be in your world?
Perfect. They can find me on my website, NicoleConnor.com. You can find me on Pinterest and Instagram at Grand Rising Experience. And you can also sign up on Substack for my newsletter and my podcast at grandrisingexperience.substack.com.
Awesome. And of course, we'll make sure we have all that information in the show notes so that you guys can connect with Nicole and get in her world, as I promise you, you won't regret it. So Nicole, thank you again so much for being an amazing guest today and bringing so much light to everyone that is out there. I can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you so much for introducing me to your audience, and I hope you have a beautiful day.
Thank you. And to everybody else out there, I hope you got some amazing takeaways. And I'm sure there's some things that stung a little bit, but don't worry, that's part of the process of growth and recognizing where you can make changes. So until next time, don't forget, do one thing positive for someone each and every day and see the difference that it makes in your life. So until next time, have a fantastic day. Hello again, and thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought tons of value, we ask that you please share, like, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to reach even more inspiring entrepreneurs who can benefit from these powerful conversations. If you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, as this feedback is an amazing gift that fuels our growth and helps us to continually improve this podcast. Looking for an extra dose of inspiration and empowerment? Then be sure to connect with me on social media. You can find me at The Lotus Effect, where I share valuable resources and tips while sharing my own journey of being an entrepreneur. And if you're interested in learning more about my coaching programs and services, be sure to check out my website at the-lotus-effect.com. Once again, thank you so much for being a part of Real Chat with Kat. Your presence balance and support makes all the difference. Remember, whether you find yourself in the depths of the mud or on the path of growth, we all have a unique journey. And just like the lotus, some of us start in the dirtiest of mud, yet as we rise and grow, we blossom into something beautiful, unique, and truly one of a kind. To all of my visionaries out there, keep rising and growing as you create your own lotus effect.